Greetings builders, Daniel here, and today on our best build selection we are going to highlight 3 builds that use all the power of fire to get things done. As always, don't forget that if you decide to make any one of those builds you can find links for the complete guides in the video description. The first build of our flaming hot selection is the Righteous Fire Juggernaut with the Marauder class. Here you can use all the tankiness and life regeneration from Juggernaut to easily sustain the Righteous Fire damage and just walk your way through the endgame. To list the pros of this build, I'll have to start with how comfortable and smooth this gameplay is. As soon as you get this build sustaining Righteous Fire, you start clearing maps without even noticing. This build is also ultra tanky, but we're going to get into more details about that soon. And if this is your first character, this build is also a great starter. You can start it with a clean account and still have it done easily. Now to list on the cons, I'll start saying that the boss damage isn't great. But don't worry, you kill map bosses easily on a low budget, but Guardians and Pinnacle bosses will take longer if you don't invest some Divine Orbs. But since you're almost unkillable, you end up killing those big bosses anyway, just need to have a little patience. Another issue is that the leveling is a little bit complicated since we use a spell as a Marauder, but if you follow closely the steps from the leveling section on the complete guide, you won't have a problem. The last con I can list is that some players find this gameplay to be tedious and too easy. Some even call it a walking simulator, but this is more a question of taste. As for budget, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with something around 105 chaos. But if you follow the crafting tips on the complete guide, this can get a lot cheaper. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, you need to invest around 150 chaos, and for easily completing your atlas, I recommend investing in your survivability, around 4 divine orbs. Don't forget that you can find a list with all the equipments that you can buy with those budgets and direct links with examples being sold from other players right now on PoEbuilds.net. You need 2 mandatory uniques for this build. The first are the Legacy of Fury boots. They escort nearby enemies and cause them to explode for an amazing clear speed. Today they are going for only 9 chaos a pair. The other mandatory unique is the Immortal Flesh belt. This one grants a huge amount of life regeneration and even a great armor buff. You can get one for only 2 chaos. For clear speed, I'll give this build 10 out of 10. As mentioned before, as soon as this build is complete, you just walk and watch every enemy burn just because of your presence. This means not stopping for casting and saving a lot of time while farming. The boss damage on the other hand is not that great. I would give it just 7 because it will need a lot of investment to deal a decent DPS on Guardians and Pinnacle bosses, but the build is still great to kill map bosses. For the survivability, this build surely has 10 out of 10. As you can see on the POB, this build gets over 100,000 armor, 2,000 life regeneration per second, over 87% of all elemental resistance, and even over 50% chance to block spell damage. Look at the effective HP, it goes beyond 240,000. Even if you try to die, it won't be easy. Following, we have the Ignited Ethereal Knives Elementalist with the Witch class. Here we take advantage of the Shaper of Flames Ascendancy node to create heal chain reaction ignites from the safe distance that Ethereal Knives provide. To list the pros of this build, I would start with these amazing satisfying explosions that you can see erasing a whole screen of enemies with a single cast. With this type of speed, it will be easy to farm a lot of currents per hour. Since you can kill everything from a good distance, this build is also very safe if played properly. Now to list the cons, I will start with its boss damage. Since this is a fire damage over time build, it's harder to have a huge single target DPS. But don't worry, you kill map bosses easily on a low budget, but Guardians and Pinnacle bosses will take longer if you don't invest more Divine Orbs. Another issue is that this build is expensive. You need to farm currency with another character before starting this one. The last con I can list is that this build uses many unique items. Even though this means that the build is easier to put together, it also means that it's harder to cap your elemental resistances. As for budget, this build is a little more complex and needs at least 5 divines to work. You need 4 mandatory unique items for this build. The first one is the Obliteration Wand. It causes enemies to explode and spread your ignites. It's super cheap, around 1 chaos. We also need the amulet Grown Fang. It grants a big percentage of your physical damage as extra chaos damage. This generates even bigger ignites. You can find them for around 5 chaos. Next we need the Polaric Devastation Ring. It covers enemies in ash for a lot more fire damage taken, but it needs to be equipped on your left ring slot. You can get one of those for around 50 chaos. Finally, we also need the Skin of the Loyal with the right colors. Those are 2 green, 3 red and 1 blue. You can find one like this for around 100 chaos. For clear speed, I'll give this build 10 out of 10. You cast many projectiles that burn enemies and cause them to explode, releasing chain reactions of new ignites and clear many enemies at a time. It's very fast and satisfying to play. Sadly, the boss damage isn't that great. I would give it just 7.5 because it will need investment to deal a decent DPS on Guardians and Pinnacle bosses, but the build still kills map bosses without a problem. For survivability, I'll give it 9 out of 10, mostly because this build can be played from a safe distance. As you can see on the POB, with flasks you can reach something around 75% physical damage reduction, 40% chance to evade and 50% chance to suppress spell damage. It's a solid survivability, but surely not a 10. Finally, we have the Onikoroshi Tectonic Slam Chieftain with the Marauder class. In this build we use the unique sword Onikoroshi and the amazing fire nodes from the Chieftain Ascendancy to achieve a huge DPS and area of effect. To list the pros of this build, I would start with its damage and clear speed. Even though you have to stop to hit the ground, it always creates a huge and devastating area that kills many enemies with a single attack. This build can also achieve huge boss damage to kill even Guardians and Pinnacle bosses in just a few seconds. Above all, it also counts with a great survivability with high armor, evasion, spell suppression and permanent fortify. Now for the cons, I would say that the main downside is the self-damage that comes with Onikoroshi. You need to invest in life regeneration to counter it. Also, the build isn't cheap. Speaking of which, this build needs at least 3 divines to be made, mainly because of Onikoroshi. From the 3 mandatory unique items you need for this build, this sword is the most expensive. You find them on the market for around 370 chaos each, but it's worth it because it grants an absurd amount of fire damage. We also need the amulet Yoke of Suffering. It causes all of your elemental damage to be able to shock enemies. Shocking enemies with all of this damage will leave them always around 50% shock. This means that they take 50% more damage. You can find those for around 10 chaos orbs at the moment. Finally, we also need an Abyssus helmet. It grants a huge amount of added physical damage and over 100% critical damage multiplier. It goes for around 20 chaos right now. For clear speed, this build deserves 9 out of 10. As mentioned before, it has a huge area of effect and it's able to kill many enemies with a single slam of your sword. The boss damage also deserves 9 out of 10. It can easily achieve over 10 million DPS and destroy big bosses in seconds, especially when combined with the Berserker skill. For the survivability, I'll give it 8 out of 10. Even though this build has permanent fortify, 90% physical damage reduction, over 75% chance to evade and over 60% chance to suppress spell damage, it also has to deal with the self damage and the extra physical damage taken from the Abyssus helmet. And that's it guys. What do you think about this selection of fire builds? Which one is your favorite? Don't forget to comment with your opinions and take a second to leave a thumbs up to support the channel. I wish you guys all the best and don't forget to keep building.